Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. We've seen record-setting heat in the last few days here in North Carolina and across the East Coast. Experts say climate change is supercharging heat waves like this one. WRAL's Liz McLaughlin is here to explain the impact of this kind of heat. Liz, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, how hot has it gotten here in our area in the last week or so?
I mean, the air is sticky. The sun is just baking you. If you've been outside this past week, you know just how unbearable it's been. We saw triple-digit temps a couple of days in a row at RDU, high 90s in Raleigh much of the rest of the week with little cool down. Even overnight when we have seen more relief in recent years or in, decades before. But the humidity really exacerbates the danger of those temperatures. So, combined, we were seeing a heat index as high as 112 degrees. That's kind of like the feels like temp, and that's a combination, of temperature and humidity, but that's really where it can just feel so gross in our area, in our part of the world. And it's even hotter if you live in a city like Raleigh or Durham because of something called urban heat islands. So basically where there are paved surfaces, maybe at your parking lot at work or on a rooftop or where there's lots of buildings, it can be as much as 9 or 10 degrees hotter than other areas. So that's really adding on to that temperature as well, compared to, say, if you live in a rural area or somewhere with more green space that can absorb that heat.
Yeah, I know. There were just a couple of days where I walked outside and it felt like standing on the pavement felt like standing on a grill or something. It was so hot. What is the metric that climate experts are using to measure the change in temperature over the last few decades?
So you might hear climate scientists keep citing something called the climate shift index. And so in plain English, the CSI or climate shift index compares how often a given temperature happens now versus the pre-industrial era. So before carbon pollution at levels that we're seeing now. And so there's a scale, and a 5 on that scale is the highest level. And that means that the heat that day is 5 times more likely because of climate change. So these temperatures, by the way, are not impossible without climate change, without carbon pollution, just far less likely. And the triangle, it's on a color scale, and so it's a very dark red. And you'll just see the triangle, North Carolina, the whole swaths of the East Coast this past week have been in that dangerous red zone.
And how does the temperature, that metric that we're seeing here in our area, how does it compare to temperature data in Raleigh over the years?
So basically the Raleigh and Durham area is about 4.5 degrees warmer on average than it was in the 1970s. And what that really means is that as far as a frequency, is that in that area, you're seeing 39 more above normal summer days each year. So that's, almost a month and a half of these kind of very hot, above average summer days. It's always kind of hot or warm in the summer in this part of the world, but that's really in just, 5 decades, a huge difference, almost 40 days more of these hot days. And as I mentioned earlier, the nights are staying warmer too. And that can have a big health impact because it's fewer chances for our bodies to cool down, especially for people who don't have, air conditioning. And climate science, by the way, I should add, because we've seen, some kind of people on social media talking, climate science was really looking at the long-term trends here. So weather is kind of like a mood, and climate science is like a whole personality. So, there may have been some 100-degree days 100 years ago, but now they're happening a lot more often and maybe earlier and later in the season, so more frequently. So the temperature and that temperature data, that we're gathering is really consistent among many different agencies that track it. NASA, from space, NOAA from a lot of temperature sensors around, the whole United States. And really 97% of climate scientists agree, who've been published, that humans are the cause. That's more than 10,000 peer-reviewed studies. So there's just not really a debate on if climate change is happening. The debate really is over which factors are contributing the most and what to do about it.
Okay, let's take a quick break right there, and we'll be right back. Liz, before the break, you mentioned that Raleigh and Durham have gone up, 4 degrees in the last few decades, temperature wise. How do state health officials monitor heat, as it continues to, these hot days continue to become more common? And how do they help people prepare to deal with it?
That's an ongoing challenge because really, it takes a lot of education to prevent the the worst impacts of heat, which by the way is the deadliest weather, related event. So heat really kills more people than tornadoes, floods, all of these weather events combined, hurricanes that we look at. So it's really dangerous. And so the Department of Health and Human Services here in North Carolina made a heat health alert system. It's bilingual, and it's kind of taking into account what the forecast is saying. And when they see spikes in emergency room visits, they have a whole dashboard that considers climate data and health impacts together. So they're monitoring, emergency department visits in real time too. And just to give you an idea of what we're looking at this year, statewide, there were about 317 heat-related visits in May, but 681 visits through June 23rd. So,
Wow.
not even done with the month yet and more than double. No confirmed deaths yet so far related to heat, but they said that is kind of hard to track because something might be a cardiac incident or, might be a vulnerable population that has something else going on health-wise, and the heat could have been, a factor that kind of pushed them over the edge, but isn't necessarily documented. So they do say there's been a slight decrease in visits compared with last year, which they credit to investing more into these alert systems, into education and resources also to help people get access to things like fans and AC who maybe didn't have them before.
What do climate experts say about how often we could see these heat waves in the future?
If you don't like this extreme heat we're having, I've got bad news for you. We're likely going to see this happening more often. We saw in 2023, it was the hottest summer on record until 2024 when that was broken. And we're on track to maybe do that again. Over the past 6 years, like 5 of those have been the hottest summers on record. So just buckle
Wow.
up because, it's gonna be rough. And it's almost a climate conundrum too, right? Because, when it's so hot, we're really relying on air conditioning to stay safe, but that's also a contributor. And climate models kind of show that if emissions stay high, which, in 2024, there was a record setting amount of carbon pollution. So we're not really slowing down, that these kind of climate shift index 5 days are going to become more common. And in Duke UNC, researchers project that the triangle specifically could triple its days above 95 degrees just by the 2050s. So it's going to be hot, and they say the heat waves could start earlier in the spring and run later into the fall, so stretch over a longer portion of the year.
Okay. With that in mind, how can people protect themselves during heat waves?
We say it again and again, but it's just, you need the reminder. Hydration is so important. Really having that water bottle with you and really drinking all the time. And I had to remind myself, because I've been out filming, doing stories, and I kind of felt a little dizzy, and realized that I just hadn't been drinking water enough. There's like no such thing as too much. Just keep drinking it. And I've been using those, liquid IV electrolyte packet things, tablets. They sell them in tablets. There's a million different brands, but that really makes a big difference. And kind of cutting back on those like sugary and alcoholic and caffeinated drinks will also help your hydration. And then rest, water, and shade. Really, especially if you're working outside, spending time outside, moving your most intense activity to the morning or the late evening, taking a 10-minute break every hour to get in the shade and try to, or into air conditioning, preferably try to cool down. There's also a cool trick. I just learned this year. The military uses it, but if you can have a tub or even, a sink or something, if you feel yourself, getting hot, having those symptoms of feeling dizzy, things like that, or just if you're feeling very hot, you can submerge your hands and preferably your forearms or your feet as well. This helps into cool water. So maybe not ice water, but
Hmm.
cold water. And that can, basically it impacts these blood vessels that can lower your core temperature at a really fast rate. So it's really cheap, pretty easy way to just lower your core temperature in a pinch. And so people can do this, if you just have a cooler water, for instance, and you're an outdoor worker, doing that just for a few minutes, sticking your forearms and submerging your hands in that cold water can really help.
Okay, good tip there. Thank you so much, Liz. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. That's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.